Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 35, obviously discussing the Nintendo 64, but also the future of interactive entertainment coming from August 1996. And indeed, this will be the verdict of the highly anticipated Nintendo 64, their third major console, not counting the one they had in the 70s. And Edge's opening column is highly enthusiastic about the possibilities of the Nintendo 64, even going so far to say that from now on things might only disappoint, considering the quality of the first two titles. More on them later. So you have the contents, article about joypads, Howard Lincoln, Nintendo, of course, Codemasters, getting a lengthy article. So the big news is the release of Nintendo 64 and selling out in Japan, of course. We see long queues here. Edge writes about many British people going all the way to Tokyo to get their hands on one. And the Nintendo 64 would go on to sell very well, not as well as the PlayStation 1. Although maybe in retrospect it was just as good as a console. There's also talk of the M2 improving, now using not one but two of its 64-bit PowerPC chips. Of course, the M2 would never be released, but this sounded like it could become really strong. So, the Japanese-only Satellaview gaining some momentum in the United States, in Japan, of course. Hey, here we have the Tokyo Toy Show with Saturn releasing, showing some new games, Fighting Vipers, Virtua Fighter Kids, Virtual Cop 2. None of the titles very big, and yes, it would be more or less the beginning of the end for the Saturn console, which wasn't doing that well anymore by mid-1996. And Nights into Dreams would be one of the last really great titles, but after that... So here's an article for a new kind of Amiga being released, which would apparently kill the Mac and PC. Well, that never happened, of course. It also used two chips, two times a PowerPC one. And, well, it looks really nice. Of course, Amiga didn't have the muscle power to take over the field again. So Apple working on the internet. I don't know why the Pippin is being shown here. But we see some news about how videos can be watched on the internet with Apple's new QuickTime technology. Ooh, well, QuickTime is still being used. And Plananet is shown here being a new provider for the internet at a cheap cost because the customer is always first for them. Your big commercial for Tunnel B1. So Chris Crawford making a sixth appearance with another essay, this time questioning whether stories in video games are good enough or not for the mainstream. He mentions that hardcore gamers are perfectly fine with a story where you die and 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 then finally make it. Well, most people are used to and might actually prefer a story where the main character doesn't die. And considering the way popular video games have evolved, Chris might actually be right in this case because it's, well, death is not such a big thing anymore in video games. Even if you do fail, you usually have a save state quite nearby, an autosave as it were, and you get to retry it again. When's the last time you've seen Game Over on your screen, for example? So here are the Codemasters. No, sorry, I'm confused. This is Naughty Dog. And they're talking about Crash Bandicoot, proudly proclaiming that people thought it was a full motion video, whereas it was actually in-play gameplay, yes, at 30 frames a second. So that was really nice. It did play very well, although I like to believe that the gameplay was rather lackluster, just the usual jumping and running we'd seen and done better in a lot of Super Nintendo and Nintendo games. They also praise the Mario 64, rightfully so, and they say that Nights into Dreams is also worth looking at, which is also true. Here we have Andrew Graham, lead programmer of Codemasters, so here's a little bio on his background, working on Micro Machines and the like. Codemasters would go on to make the Colin McRae games and now the Dirt games, so yes, racing games are their forte. Here's Millennium, with a pretty cool looking picture, and trying to be a bit like the Bitmap brothers, I guess. And they have a couple of games brewing. First of all, the biggest one is Creatures, which is, I wish they talked a little bit more about this. It's not so much a game, it's more like an AI project. You have your little creature and they work kind of like a Tamagotchi, but they can also talk with other creatures and they end up doing their own thing. Pretty cool. I've never seen it in action, but it did sell well and there were actually sequels. Brains and Planes was a racing game but never released, and Medieval was released. There was also a PlayStation Portable version, and rather lackluster action platforming game, but pretty cool character design. So yeah, Edge asked them about which platforms are up and should they be working on. Well, the PlayStation is the answer according to this company. They don't like how Nintendo 64 is using cartridges. And of course, Creatures is only for the PC because of all the AI. Here's a preview of The City of Lost Children, based on the movie by the person who directed Emily. A very dark story, very quirky. And this video game is kind of like Resident Evil. It's a survival horror game, but universally panned. Didn't do very well. Edge gave it a 4, if I recall correctly. But still 3 pages of preview. So, yes, it looks dark, and yes, you play a little girl, just like in the movie. Here's The Darkening, a sequel to Privateer, which itself was a spin-off the Wing Commander series. So, again, space trucking through space. This one, interestingly, is mostly known for its full motion video. High production costs when it came to videos. So that's what the Wing Commander series eventually became known for. Its high production costs. Somewhat ironic considering that Elite, which the original game all the Wing Commander games were based on, was made for the BBC Micro, which was a lot of gameplay for very little technology. And Wing Commander by 1996 had become a lot of technology with a little gameplay. Still got pretty good reviews. Pandemonium, a subpar action platforming game with a silly looking clown. Good use of 3D graphics, but it was not very interesting to play. I believe it was released for PlayStation 1 and the PC, maybe Saturn. So here we have Nights into Dreams, a fantastic game, although I hadn't played that very long. I couldn't care much for getting higher and higher scores. I just wanted to get through the levels, which looked fantastic. Spectacular even. Probably the best looking game on the Saturn, even though here in this preview the developers said that they couldn't get everything out of the Saturn they liked, which gives you an idea how difficult it was to program for. Yeah, it wasn't as good as Mario 64. Wasn't as good as Sonic either. And in this preview, they also talk about how this being Sonic Team, they here's the interview. They didn't want to make a Sonic game; they wanted to make something different for once. Well, that didn't help the Saturn, of course. Although there was a Sonic game in development, never released, which didn't look very good. Crash Bandicoot, yes, Sony's answer to Mario, and great animation, tight gameplay, but still. Yeah. More like Super Mario Bros. 1 than anything else, and anybody who's played Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, knows that the genre had improved in the years, and Crash Bandicoot to me felt like a step backwards. Now Quake doesn't feel much better than Doom according to Edge, and I get that. At the time we were also a bit disappointed. We had Duke Nukem 3D already, And it took a while for us to see how this game could be better, and that was mostly thanks to mods, to people adding to this game. The 3D engine was great. It would, I wouldn't say revolutionize, but it was a pretty big part of PC culture at the time. Definitely kickstarting the use of 3D cards for computers, so that was important for gaming on computers. But Quake by itself, I've never even beat the game. If I was playing it, I was playing against bots and using all kinds of mods for fun death matches. But the single player mode didn't interest me much. Fighting Vipers, pretty good, but not spectacular. Fighting game by Sega, not as good as Virtua Fighter 2. Battery Toshinden, which is some kind of kiddie version of them with big heads. Well, nobody cared about Toshinden by 1996, or the kiddie version. Virtual Cop 2, more of the same. That's really all there is to say when it comes to Virtual Cop 2. I wish I could find something else about it. Here we have Codemasters. Yeah, they made the Micro Machines games and Game Genie. Now, I'm not sure if this is true or not. I'm pretty sure I heard this story once, but couldn't find it on the internet again. But from what I understood, the original Micro Machines released for the Nintendo had a bug, and they couldn't release the game with the bug anymore, and the chips already developed. But luckily, Codemasters, they made their own cartridges, and that was pretty cool. For example, when they made Micro Machines for the Genesis, it had additional controller ports, so you could play with 4 players without getting a multi-tap. All thanks to Codemasters actually making their own carts, which is very unusual. So they were making their own carts. They release Micro Machines for the NES, and there's a bug. And what they do is they actually put in another chip which would hack the original chip so that the bug would be fixed. It was a horrible bug. Something like pressing start and select at the same time would crash the game. Something really, really bad. And they had that chip to fix Micro Machines, and they thought, hey, we could use this chip to change other games too. And then they released the Game Genie on the market, and that was quite a fad in 1991. A lot of people were like, yeah, let's play all our old Nintendo games again, now using Game Genie codes. So that was quite a win for them, even though Nintendo didn't like it. Here's a lengthy article about the history of joypads, starting with the military. Apparently a joystick was a slang term for the what do you call it? The joystick of the airplane to alter flying direction, and that slang went into the military, where they also used the first joystick not used for planes but for bombs, and that kind of military technology found its way into video games too. For example, in MIT. Although at MIT you of course had Space War, which had its own first joypad, because the original version of the game you had to lean forward over the computer console, these big computers, and press all these kind of buttons so you could play, but you had to lean forward, and that hurt the player's back. So the players were like, hey, why don't we just extend these buttons into like a box, and then you hold the box in our laps and play the game that way. And that way the first joypad was made. So that's pretty cool. I also found out that the original version of Space War, in order to turn, you didn't hold the button in. No, it was a toggle. So you press the button and start turning, you press it again to stop turning. I've played the game on emulators, but that didn't work like that. So I found that fascinating, that game design was so primitive at the time. You see pictures of all the different joypads through the years. Well, not all of them, but a great deal of them. And a lot of them were criticized or praised. Nintendo 64 one being getting a lot of attention for the analog stick, which I didn't think was that revolutionary. I mean, you already had analog joysticks for flight simulators, but okay, they stuck one on a joypad, And I never liked it because I prefer the digital input of a joypad, and to this day, analog sticks annoy me. The newest Metroid game uses the analog stick for movement, and I can't move Samus as sharply as I used to, which, yeah, I don't like. Oh well. Here we have Howard Lincoln. First, there's an article about whether or not the Nintendo 64 will be a smash hit. And I liked it a lot because they give 10 reasons why it will be great and 10 reasons why it's not. And a lot of these reasons, they turn out to be correct. That it's too much of a kiddie console, that Nintendo would be too strong of a competition itself against other third-party developers being able to keep their cartridges cheaper than other brands. Yeah, they didn't attract enough third-party developers. There is some talk about the price of cartridges being too expensive. I don't remember that being a problem when I was a kid, but I guess that was the case. They were a bit more expensive than PlayStation 1 though, but I didn't care. I mean, all the games I bought were secondhand or borrowed. Yeah, and the 64DD, they expected to be a flop, and of course they were right. And that's pretty much one of the last console extensions ever made. I also talk about how maybe Pilot Wings and maybe Mario 64 are the only two games that will be good for the system. Well, thankfully there was Rare, who made great games like GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie, but if it weren't for Rare, there would not be that many good games for the Nintendo 64. Here's an interview with Howard Lincoln. He says something quite startling. He says the 32-bit systems were not an improvement on the 16-bit systems, and you know, at the time I think he was right. If you consider 1996. What kind of games could you play back then for your 32-bit systems? Well, you had Tekken and Ridge Racer, Daytona Virtual Fighter, and Resident Evil, maybe? That was pretty much it. So, the 16-bit consoles were still better. We had 1995 had Yoshi's Island, Chrono Trigger, Donkey Kong Country 2, Killer Instinct, Earthbound, Super Mario RPG. So 60-bit's still going pretty strong late 1995. And Harold Lincoln's like, yeah, well, you know, 64-bit is going to be so much better. And 32-bit, it's just going to be forgotten. Well, that wasn't the case. The PlayStation sold much better, but still. Yeah, some skepticism about the 64DD, and Lincoln saying that the cartridges and the DD format can live together. It's not a problem. Just kind of the case for Japan. This is an art commercial. Some guy trying to impress a girl by learning tips for Mortal Kombat in a magazine, which then disintegrates her. Apparently he plays too good, and then he gets to continue reading his magazine. So here's the review for Super Mario 64, and Edge is extremely enthusiastic, handing out their first 10 out of 10 in the history of the magazine. And back then, the 10 was really a 10. And I have to agree with them, even though I personally didn't like the game that much. I missed the action of the older Mario games. I never cared much for 3D environments to look around for, and 3D platform I've never liked, but it was a good game, I can't deny that. And a lot of people love walking around in 3D areas, as witnessed in the Grand Theft Auto series, and this was our first taste of it for most people. Now, Pilot Wings got a 9 out of 10, and I think that was also deservingly so. Really fun game. Fantastic graphics, of course. Now, I didn't care much for the missions, but just being able to fly around and try to find all the little secrets of the islands, that was just really cool. So, 2 wins for Nintendo, and then it'll take a while before they had another good game. I have to hurry up a bit. So, Moto Toon GP, was it the name of the game? Anyhow, it doesn't matter. Getting a 7 out of 10, and Edge says that it improved the controls a bit, but wasn't as good as Mario Kart. Churro Q, apparently a sequel to an old MSX game, the MSX being an early 80s computer mostly popular in Japan. And Edge gives it a 6 out of 10, so that's not worth looking into for the PlayStation 1. Actual Golf, not as good as the other big golf game, Edge says, which is, I can't seem to find the name, PGA Tour. But still good enough to get a 7. Back issues. All right, new media. Bill Gates released a book, and Edge says it's fairly good, and I like the attitude. I mean, it's about the future of computer technology, and well, who else would have such an ability to actually form that future? It must be fascinating to read 20 years later, see if everything happened the way he thought. Some odd CDs to toy around with, manga. What's it called? Sakuba and Deka Part 1, apparently. This was funny little blip about the Apple Message Pad 130. Edge ultimately saying you're paying £500 for a fancy-looking notebook. So yeah, Apple products expensive back then too. The Game Boy Pocket, that would be a nice improvement over the original. Of course, the Game Boy Color was a much more important difference, but you can play Pokemon in this one. A couple of CDs being released. Okay, the gallery, we have Dark Savior apparently. Two people kissing, you don't see that very often in games. Some more fancy shots of games I don't immediately recognize. The Darkening apparently. Well, it looks fantastic actually. Talked about that earlier. Wipeout. What game is this? Solar Crusade. Here's some talk about Soft Image, which I think is still used as a 3D program for your computer at home. So Soft Image showing its power in 1996 already. And a couple of pictures here. Wasn't Reboot that program on TV for kids? I don't remember. So, Last Bronx, you remember that game? It's a fighting game by Sega, yet another one. This one made by AIM3, I think? And yeah, it's a not very interesting fighting game, but it uses weapons, so that's how they try to differentiate themselves from Virtua Fighter. So, Xevious 3D version. Not interested in that. Gunblade, wasn't that a hit? I don't remember. Decathlete, well, Sega's answer to International Track and Field. Dunkmania, a game by Namco apparently, some basketball game. Ooh, a lot of glare. So, a lot of retro classic compilations. Sega Ages with good old Outrun. IREM, not having R-Type, but other games like 10-Yard Fight and Kung Fu. So, Bubble Bobble Collection, yet another. Here's Namco Museum 4 ready, finally showing Pac-Land, which was a revolutionary platforming game, older than Super Mario Bros. 1. Of course, not as much fun to play, but a lot of elements were shown. And Super Pang, the, was it that Neo Geo or something? No, it was Capcom, actually. Well, never played it. Yes, lots of jobs in England at the time. To work in the industry, rare, getting 2 pages, of course, them being the biggest. Climax also big. Pro Action Replay, how about that? And letters. So, a letter complaining about controls not being a thing for disabled players. Well, a lot of different types of disabled players, but there have been, through the years, certain technologies to help people. I once had a customer who had lost a hand, and he played games using a joystick, a fighting joystick. Remember that? Yeah, what's this letter about? When is the next GP2 coming out? Come on, Jeff Cremont, give us our game. And Edge doesn't have much to say, simply saying Jeff Cremont wants the game to be perfect before being released. Okay. Yeah, I don't remember this letter exactly, but something about how that the 32-bit systems have disappointed, and hopefully the Nintendo 64 will change that. The good games will come back. Well, it's not as simple as that, of course. But, to be honest, early 1996, mid-1996 was probably the worst time for video gaming in a long time, quality-wise. Super Mario 64 changed all that. But this will talk about Chris Crawford's work. Don't remember if it was positive or negative, but people have very strong opinions of him, as they should, because he has very strong opinions about the industry. Okay. And the Q&A part is back. Maybe for the last time, I hope. Somebody asking, what's up with the NEC computer? Well, that gained some traction in Japan, but other than that. And instead of a preview for next month, there's some talk about Party Time Los Angeles, probably after the E3. And apparently one of the Edge reporters gets thrown out of the Playboy Mansion, and Edge has a chuckle about that. And there's some partying going on. And then, well, that's it, I guess. No idea what next month will feature. Actually, I do, but there's no sign here. Next month will be about data storage, which doesn't sound very exciting, but I hear from others that the cover is very pretty. So that could be fun. Here's the back, the nice mirror view of this Nintendo logo. And that was Edge 35. So we'll see each other again at Edge 36, September 1996. And until then.